The Banking Scene Director's Cut goes behind the scenes, sharing stories and insights to help you build the bank of tomorrow.
So, welcome to today's episode of the Banking Scene Director's Cut, where we will be discussing all things AI and Agentic AI with Alok and Anshuman from Cognizant. Welcome to the show, guys.
Andrew.
To start off with, we're going to have a brief discussion about a roundtable on AI that we hosted on your behalf in Brussels, and then we'll go into the specifics about agentic AI and things like that. So to kick off with, if you can remember the roundtable, because it was over a month ago now, looking back at it, is there anything that genuinely stood out for you that came out of the round table?
Yeah. So thanks, Andrew. Like we at the round table, right? There were a lot of discussion about trust, governance, cost of babysitting of AI models, right?
Yeah, that was an interesting comment, that cost of oversight, cost of babysitting. It was a great soundbite.
Yeah. And then what at least we observed, right? Banks are ready, whether banks are ready to move from experiment to enterprise level rollout, right? For operational use. So that was kind of a common consensus were there in the room. And for me, what stood out was a common theme, what we heard from most of the bankers in the room was trust and people, right? These are two things could, if I have to say, right, what stood out, it came, right? Maybe Anshuman, you want to add?
Yeah, I want to add two things. The outstanding thing that came out for me was an AI communication framework towards the customer, just like we have the cookie framework today. As for GDPR, now there will be an equivalent and more complex AI communication framework. And I personally had that feeling. I don't understand today's cookie framework. What chance do I have to understand AI communication framework? So
you might have to get your AI to help you understand the AI communication framework, right?
yes, and that was one. The second thing was I also echo Alok's point of view on readiness, because there was a question asked by one of us about European LLMs and their usage, right? And the response was very fuzzy, right? So that means that no matter, and I'm talking from the context of Europe here, because both me and Alok sit in Brussels.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I did not get the feeling that European LLMs are adding too much value today. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I was surprised.
Did it change your view at all on where banks are actually on the maturity curve? Did their bit of fuzziness make you think actually maybe their understanding lags a little bit?
I feel that especially in the area of agentic AI, I think Gen AI, they have started to understand quite well, because each party has their own chatbots and they have experimented with natural language processing for long. So they have started to understand it. But the feeling that I got is when they start chaining different use cases into a process and they view the process as a whole, that understanding is still lacking. And that understanding is also lacking from a language of communication that is internal. So when I say that my process is 80% agentified or 60% agentified, what does that mean? Which part? What does it do? So I felt that that language had not evolved. And although the meeting was 1 month back, I don't think much has changed in that 1 month, because we are doing projects as we speak.
Yeah.
So we come across this absence of language. all
And
the time.
you mentioned about, agentic AI, and that was actually one of the maybe contentious discussions, was a lack of a shared definition of what is truly agentic. There was broad agreement that agentic means systems that are capable of reasoning and acting autonomously. And that is different from traditional automation or RPA or something like that. But in your work, because as you say, you're doing projects with banks at the moment, does the definition matter actually when it comes down to it? Does it matter that banks don't agree on what agentic is? In trying to secure project funding or trying to move things forward, does having a strong definition make any difference?
Yeah. So, Andrew, like you said, right, one of the early themes in the room was, do we have a shared definition of agentic AI, right?
Mhm.
And I think people explained in their own words. Agentic is doing things, right? Like you said, understanding, reasoning, acting autonomously, right? So these were the words you can pick up from different representations from different banks, but there was no one common definition. And in my view, definition, does it really matter? I don't think so. But what is important is how do the maturity curves are moving in the organization, right?
Yeah.
If you look at Cognizant, we have also almost 18 months ago, right? We started creating our whole AI strategy and we simplified it. We said, hey, we have three vector strategy. Vector one is how do I become more productive, right? Enabling hyper productivity aspect. Then how do I industrialize AI, right? That's the vector two. And the third one is identifying the enterprise, right? And that's where the current evolution happening on identifying the enterprise, right? And it's all about, I think if I link that, right, definition, and then it goes towards the measurement part, right? How do you AI success is getting measured today? It's not about how do I say isolated models, right? It's all about
Mhm.
engineering intelligence, right, at the enterprise with purpose of building specific solution for different business processes, right? I think Anshuman was alluding to the different projects that we have been engaged, whether it's a mortgage, whether it's a KYC. How do we identify to bring the business values? I think that's
Mhm.
where Cognizant and also the different banks which we talk are focusing.
Uh, Interestingly,
I want to
I
add
mm,
a nuance to what Alok said. So there are two types of agentification mindsets.
right.
One is a plumber-like mindset that there are certain leaks, fix them by agentification. There are leaks, maybe data leaks, document leaks. Yeah, so you take the hammer and hammer the nail, basically, or wherever the nail appears, right? So that's one approach. And the second approach is a value chain approach, where which Alok was defining, KYC, mortgage. So where an end customer or end PNL gets impacted. There you are doing 5 6 different types of agentifications in the value chain to get the job done, right?
Mhm.
What happens is there there is a confusion between a use case and a value chain.
Okay.
So a use case is create a credit memo. That's a use case. The value chain is basically give faster mortgage decisions. That's the value chain. And there I then chime back to what Alok said. The measurement will not be how fast you generate credit memo. It will be, are you able to give the mortgage decision faster or not? And that's where we need some type of a language, because the senior management, although they have become a lot more educated on agentic over the last 5 6 months, the language that they will approve a budget is still the old language that did I make a mortgage decision faster and safer,
Mm.
and not how many agents were there. Agents are a means to that end. So you need a mapping between agentic language and the human decision making framework of today.
I think that's an important point, because that was one of my questions, was what language helps executives understand the difference without getting caught up in the technical terminology. And I think you've just put your finger on it there. The executives understand business value. They don't need to understand the technical workings. They don't care whether it's an agent or not. As a matter of fact, I had an interview, an off-the-record interview with one of the bankers that was in the room. I followed up with him after the roundtable, and he said to me, "Andrew, it makes no difference whether it's agentic or not. What makes a difference is the outcome." And he said, if I can show value, my project or my initiative will get approved. It doesn't make a difference whether it's AI, agentic AI, RPA, or anything like that. It's, can I create value for the bank? So you're working on a lot of projects at the moment. Where do you see a AI-enabled workflow being genuinely agentic rather than just advanced automation? I think one of the bankers in the room had brought up mortgages, and you've mentioned mortgages. I think there was some quite astonishing statistics around that. Yeah, where are you seeing the best proper agentic as opposed to just advanced automation?
We are seeing maximum amount of agentic in the domain of KYC
Mm-hmm.
and lending. Uh, and lending. And KYC is for cost reduction reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Lending is basically actually today EBF has come up with a European Banking Federation has come up with a paper on how European banks need to fund European reindustrialization. Okay, so
Interesting.
so the lending is driven by that single objective across all banks: is how do we move money faster where Europe needs it, right? So therefore there is a huge emphasis on lending related agentification. Of course, KYC is the starting of that, but it's looked at as a separate compliance initiative, not as a lending. Lending is the business decision making to lend,
Mm-hmm.
essentially.
And did you notice any um, particular differences between the larger banks and the smaller banks in terms of ambition or readiness or fear of being left behind? We had at least one small bank in the room, and besides budget, what do you think their biggest the differences are? Do you think they're trying to keep up at the moment? Do you think they have challenges keeping up? What do you notice in the market?
I think, like you mentioned, right, there was a representation from a small bank from Belgium, right? So I think they also were thinking in the same directions, right? How do I bring AI in, starting from software development lifecycle to the business process, right? But what I observed in the room, they were, I think, how do I say, one step behind, right? They don't want to be the first one to try. They want to learn from other banks to take the first step and probably not do the same mistakes and build from there, right? So
Mhm.
I think that's kind of a view I got. But like, we just had a very small representation from a smaller bank, so we cannot generalize this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we see that's also right, in a broader scheme as well, right? Some banks are taking a step forward, experimenting, taking it to the production, and some banks were saying, okay, let's wait, let's see how it's evolving, learn from that, and then take a step forward. So it's kind of a that's kind of a perspective, at least I can say I got in the room.
Same echo there. I also see an opportunity there because we as Cognizant, we are our own agent zero. We have lots of agents, so we have lots of scars on our back of having done wrong things, right things, and we also do projects for banks. So actually, we could become the agent here to translate those learnings to the smaller banks in a safe way, because there are genuine risks out there. One of the biggest risks that the big banks have the balance sheet to take on is token spend. So if you take wrong agentic decisions, you will spend lots of tokens. A small bank's margin can be wiped out for 6 months if they take a wrong decision. So they have good reason to play safe. And there I echo Alok's point of view. Maybe we can help there. Maybe we can become that safety valve which says, okay, there are certain things you should not experiment with. We have seen that. And this is where you get value.
I read a post on LinkedIn yesterday, and I can't remember which organization it was, but apparently an organization in America managed to burn $500 million worth of tokens in 1 month, or rack up a bill for $500 million worth of. I don't know on which platform, and I don't know how that one's going to play out, but I should suspect that whoever ended up burning through those is going to be finding themselves in hot water. So your learnings and your lessons are very much transferable to banks of all sizes, actually, because everybody's got to be very conscious of their balance sheet for their shareholders and things like that. And Alok, you had touched on right at the beginning when you spoke about trust and people. And human oversight is something that people are, we still hear human in the loop all the time. And even at the round table, there was broad agreement that most of the banks aren't ready yet to allow agents to run fully end-to-end business processes without at least human oversight. And we'll get into babysitting in a bit. And Cognizant has actually argued publicly that decision traceability and human intervention remains critical as AI moves into the workflows. So what does human in the loop really need to mean in practice that goes beyond just the human being a rubber stamper? Because that's my biggest concern, is that AI will remove a lot of this manual work that people have been doing. And what they'll be left with is just the decisions, but they'll have so many decisions to make that they'll end up being a human robot at the end of it. So what does human in the loop really need to look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to simplify the discussion, right? So human in the loop, if you look at from the software development life cycle, right? So we are generating X percentage code from using the GitHub Copilot or Claude or any of the technologies, right? But whether it's contextual to the organization, and that's where the human in the loop comes to make sure it's following the right security guideline, right risk framework, right from the coding standard perspective, right? And that human in the loop intelligence goes back to the system again, so that next iteration it produces the code which is relevant for that organization, right? So that's purely from IT perspective, right? But if you look at from business perspective, right, where there is a client impact, right, and that's what you are mentioning. Right? None of the banks which we saw in the room are allowing autonomous agents today.
Yes,
right? Because it's a reputational uh, risk that bank has to be sure before they take it, right? They are experimenting. They are in the phase. What I've seen, a lot of internal use cases, they are taking it to the production, like certain use cases for a private bankers, right? Which is internal use case. They are able to take the production, already bringing the efficiency. The whole human in the loop aspect is how do you bring the last 20 years, 30 years knowledge of a particular bank, way of thinking, way of working, a risk exposure, right? Back to the systems, back to the technology.
So right now humans are basically acting as guides and mentors for AI systems, and the humans will eventually be removed from the loop once that 20, 30 years knowledge is codified. Potentially. I'm not putting words in your mouth there, but that's the way that I'm extrapolating it going forward. Are there any areas at the moment that you think that banks should just say, for now, this is off limits? You mentioned reputational impact. Are there any other ones where you would suggest that banks need a human besides things that might cause reputational impact?
Anshuman?
I think, see, one of the things that I'm observing is that AI is also putting at the fingertips of banks a lot of advanced modeling technologies which can be
Mhm.
deployed very fast, right? Banks have been using machine learning and modeling for very, very long time, but these are a stable class of models that they use for credit decisioning, for fraud, and other such things. But AI is putting lots of new models in play. So, first of all, I would say banks should definitely experiment with these models, but at the same time, they have to put the human in the loop in a very thick way so that the human understands the failures of the model.
Right.
Because you always come up with this language that the LLM vendors are generating. I heard one of them, I'll not quote the vendor, they use the word dreaming. So what they mean by dreaming is the agent goes to sleep at night, dreams or thinks about what happened, then learns from the mistakes at night, and next morning they come to in the morning much more aware of the new context. So this they are calling as dreaming, which I like as a very sweet word, but they could have used reinforcement learning also, which would have been much more clearer as to what that is doing.
Yes.
So
I would prefer that kind of terminology. Dreaming sounds too close to hallucination for me.
exactly. So my point is there is a lot of communication, miscommunication ongoing while new models are being put out there. So there, I think the banks need to differentiate between reality and marketing, and then enable the human to experiment safely, not block experimentation, because all these are new sciences which have to be used for the benefit of humankind, but with human in the loop.
You had mentioned about lots of tools and lots of agents is also lots of tools. We touched on the discussion around agent swarms or single powerful agent, and Cognizant's neuro multi-agent accelerator is positioned around pre-built reference network scalability, interoperability, task routing, that kind of a thing. In banking, where do specialized agents make more sense than general purpose agents? And how should the bankers think about swarms versus one single all powerful agent?
So we are recommending a mix here, right? We are recommending a mix. So we find that whenever we touch a business, a P&L sensitive business process, right? The orchestration frameworks are broken. Okay, there are multiple implementations, multiple systems. The systems and the orchestration frameworks have to talk to each other. There are legacy BPM implementations which are not fit for purpose, or they are too costly. So there are many issues in uh, speeding up conventional lending or P&L sensitive processes, right? Now there we recommend a generic orchestration approach using agentic orchestration and deterministic orchestration together. So it's a generic problem. We will attack that problem in the same way across banks whenever we get an opportunity.
Right.
But then there are specific things like if you move from credit memo generation, which is generic in mortgages but highly specialized in wholesale banking, there I would create specialist agents which understand the nuance of commercial banking, large loans, and allow them to create very meaningful documents even though they are micro. They're not generic document collators. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's an example of generic versus specific. Although workflow orchestration can be specific because of IT architecture, the pattern we have to take is a generic one, that you combine an agentic orchestration with a deterministic orchestrator and make the humans, agents, and the system work together.
Together, yeah. The humans become part of that system underneath the agentic orchestration. That makes sense. One of the concerns that's being floated around at the moment is operational resilience, because people are, agentic systems introduce new resilience questions, right? Agents might access tools, trigger workflows, potentially create cascading errors. Interestingly, I'm reading a pre-release of a book by Chris Skinner. Do you know Chris Skinner, the author? He's given me an early preview copy of a book that he has just finished called The Day We Couldn't Pay. And the core construct around that is a rogue agent in a bank that caused a number of cascading errors, right? How should banks approach operational resilience with now their new dependency on agents and agentic workflows and that kind of a thing?
I think maybe if you look at, right, even in the past, right, there were always a strategy to have something like a kill switch, right? So it was there in a different form. Now the similar thing has to be built, right? If how agents would work in a certain framework, like a human, right? There is a HR framework, there is a finance framework, there is a disciplinary actions, right? That as a manager, as an organization, you can take for human, right? Similar structure in some way or other has to be built for agents as well. The supervisory agents, right? How do you look at if something is not controllable? Do you have a kill switch in your architecture, etc., right? So I think that's where the initial thinking is coming in. But maybe Anshuman, if you want to add.
Yeah, so along with the kill switch, of course, you need a kill switch. You need, and there again, I go back to our earlier discussion about language, right? So we need to say this is a document data extraction agent. So all similar document extraction agents across different value chains should be evaluated similarly. This is a agent which reads news items and gives insights. So all similar things. So the language there will help us create unified evaluation frameworks which monitor similar activities in a similar way. Okay.
Right.
And then we subject them to formal model governance processes. So today's model governance processes are very slow. They align with the ECB mandates and priorities, the capital calculation process. AI is a real time thing. It happens now. So we have to put a evaluation framework which is fit for purpose, which then feeds into the model governance processes and allows them to react faster. So that is needed in addition to kill switch, because I used the example of the Boeing guys who crashed in 2 or 3 places, public, right? So I'm not quoting anything private. So
Yeah.
so they had a kill switch, which they could not exercise in the right time because the machine did not listen to them, right? So the fuel, I'm not aware of the technical things, but the Boeings crashed because of a machine-based decision.
Mhm. And that's one of the topics again that we had brought up was what happens or what should happen when an agent behaves correctly according to its instructions, but the outcome is still commercially or operationally harmful. And one of the comments made around the table was, we have a tendency to forgive humans for making a human error, but we don't forgive technology for making an error, even when it was operating within its boundaries. And we've just talked about a kill switch, because one of the ideas that was floated was we need potentially agents to have a performance evaluation like you would have a human, like you've just said. And if it's not performing, we've got to fire that agent and replace it with something else or something like that. Do you see banks adopting this kind of approach at the moment, where they start treating the agents more and more along similar ways that they would treat their staff? The performance evaluation, the feedback, the replacement, the firing, maybe the kill switch, of individual agents and swapping them out. Is that something that happens today, or is it still too early to tell?
Um, Andrew, if you remember, right, in the room when this topic came, we mentioned the AI agents. It's like raising a child,
Yes.
right? And that was resonated so well because to raise a child, right, from the birth and then as they go along, and you also mentioned the forgiveness part, right, where you, uh, for your kid or as a human, you have some tolerance, right? Uh, I think similar. Again, it's too early to say, but that's how the agents has to be raised as well. So that kind of analogy was mentioned in the room, and we had a broader alignment on that, right? I think that's the simple answer to the question I could think of, Andrew.
Okay.
Whether it's they're already adopting, they're thinking, where they are in the process, I think it depends upon also the individual bank's maturity and risk appetite, right? So that's kind of that's where I can kind of answer that question, Andrew.
There's I've got two more questions that I want to try and slip in. The first one that I want to know is, do you have any thoughts on where agentic AI specifically might create real competitive advantage in the future, and where it will simply become table stakes? We've spoken about loans and mortgages and things like that. And I think very quickly, everybody will do the same thing. So there's no more a competitive advantage. There was some discussion around hyper personalization being a long-term prize, but where have you got any thoughts, forward thinking now, about where you think this has the opportunity to create real competitive advantage?
See, I think that lot of the ingestion of new technologies into banks take a lot of time, because whenever a new project is visualized or an initiative is visualized, no matter who says what, they're always starting with a sunk cost fallacy. Because I have so much existing investments, I can only do so much, right? Agentification completely throws that argument out of the window. The systems can remain where they are, and you can start doing new things. So wherever there is new analytical methodologies that the bank can use to either lend fast, trade fast, or pay fast, or even go beyond banking in a holistic way, that's where we see lot of uh, non-legacy modernization projects starting off. That is, you have a legacy, acknowledge the legacy, and then adapt agentification to overcome legacy challenges. So that's what I see. So mortgages also is okay. Everybody will do it, but everybody will do it in a subtly different way given their existing backlog, okay, and their existing market positioning. That's where the differences will be. A smaller bank who wants to become a leader will treat agentification differently than a big bank who wants to hold position.
Interesting. That's very insightful. And that leads neatly to my final question. If you were advising a bank CEO that wants to move from agentic AI experimentation to creating real enterprise value in the next 12 months, and you've just said, things in banks take a long time, 12 months, it might take even for them just to make a decision. But what three things would you tell them to do first? And what would you tell them not to do? Which one of you wants to take that question? And quite happy to get answers from both of you.
So first, I would advise the CEOs to evolve the common language of agentification as fast as possible, so that the two or three different approaches to agentification, use case based approach, uh, problem fixing approach versus value stream approach, all of them can be experimented, attempted with similar evaluated outcomes. So you need to be able to talk in the same language across the three different approaches to agentification. Okay.
Mhm.
So that's the first thing. The second thing I would want him to do is put in a good agentic project evaluation framework, right? And which should not be compliance oriented. Today, a lot of the thinking is still very, very dominated by compliance. What will happen if we are not meeting EU AI Act regulations and things like that? So that should not be the dominant process. You should think value streams or business benefits in a stable, sustainable way. So that evaluation criteria is the second thing that they should evolve. And the last thing that they should also do is encourage a lot of experimentation, which means that they will have to put in smarter guardrails. So there are two ways to do it. You can say, don't experiment, these are the only models that you have. Or you can say, these are the models that we give you, these are the guardrails, and hence please understand them and experiment.
Mhm.
The more experimentation that an enterprise enables, the more value it will create. We see it personally in Cognizant as well, right? The teams which are experimenting more are racing ahead, and the others who are not, they they remain in a static equilibrium. Those are the three things that I would say a CEO should do. What they should not do is follow the herd, okay? Because agentification is, if I use an analogy, it's not a visit to a shopping mall, it's a visit to a COVID testing laboratory. So you may get a good virus there if you are not careful. So, so you need to go and have this demystification framework and ask the tough questions up front with a positive mindset, right? And that's what I would sort of share.
Brilliant. Alok, you want anything to share before we sign off?
Yeah, I think Anshuman has covered. What we also probably advise is there are two ways to look at, right? One is we have structured process, right? Where you follow, take things to the production and make sure that your value realization framework is upfront agreed. Because what we see sometime projects moves, right? And certain business case was done at the start of the project. But how will you measure it, right? The success is not clearly agreed. And I think that's linked to the common language discussions we had in the room, right? In the round table as well. What is the common communication language, right? Obviously, a lot of technical aspects which we don't need to bring it here, right?
Yeah.
How to address that, how to address the whole EU AI Act framework, etc. That's I think that's a given, right?
Yeah.
But what is important is you have upfront common understanding of the measurement and the duration of the measurement as well, right? Because it will evolve over the time, the success of the project. I think that's just to round this together, apart from what Anshuman just mentioned, right? That's the most important. And change management, I think that's also an aspect which we did not touch, which we touched in the room, is very, very important, right? Because this is a shift in thinking itself, right? And obviously in the doing, but just before that, it's the thinking. So I think change management aspect should not be underestimated in the whole move from AI to agentic AI.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for the excellent insights you shared with us today. And in the article and in this video, I will drop the link to your LinkedIn profile so people know where to get hold of you if they want to carry on with the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.